welcome to LawPod. Today we are very lucky to be joined by two guests, Tamara Jamimi and Dr. Munir Nuseibah. If you don't mind, hopefully you can both introduce yourselves for the listeners.
Good morning to all of our listeners. My name is Tamara Tamimi. I'm a PhD student in Queen's University Belfast School of Law in my third year of research, and I'm from Jerusalem, Palestine.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with you and with Tamara. My name is Munir Nuseibah. I am Professor of International Law at Al-Quds University, and I also head the Human Rights Clinic and the Community Action Center at Al-Quds University, both that train students as well as provide legal aid and conduct international advocacy for human rights for Palestinians. I'm also based in Jerusalem, Palestine.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for both being here with us this morning. We'll just kick it off with the first question. So, Tamara, you've previously recorded an episode of LawPod on Palestine and unpacking the situation in Gaza. That was back in November 2023. So I was hoping you could just start with an update on the situation. Maybe you can tell us about some of the atrocities that have been committed by Israel against Palestinians in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and Jerusalem as well.
Yes. I can't believe it's been almost 3 months on my last podcast with LawPod here. It feels both a very long time ago, but also as if it was yesterday. It's something that's unbelievable that 4 months into the assault on Gaza, it's still ongoing, with casualties continuing on the rise, international crimes still being committed under the eyes of this so-called rules-based order. Now, after more than 120 days on the latest assault on Gaza, the number of Palestinian fatalities has reached jumped over 28,000 Palestinians. We have 8,000 trapped under the rubble. Most of them are presumed dead. As well, the number of injuries has almost reached 70,000. This is updated until yesterday on the 14th of February. The estimates on the number of Palestinians internally displaced varies, but the lowest percentage that was recorded, which is by the UN OCHA, it stands at 75% of the total population of the Gaza Strip. Some estimates, they say that it's up to 85%. Most of these internally displaced Palestinians now are concentrated in Rafah. Some sources say 1.5 million. Others say they estimated up to 1.6 million. To put things into perspective for our listeners, this is out of a total of 2.3 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in total. So at least 1.4 million of them are concentrated in Rafah, whose normal, quote-unquote, number of residents does not reach 300,000. So, to give the bigger picture here, there is an imminent risk of an Israeli invasion of Rafah now. Every crazy aspect of the humanitarian catastrophe that we have been witnessing would be significantly exacerbated if this actually happens. To quote Josep Borrell from the EU, he says, Prime Minister Netanyahu is asking for people in Rafah to evacuate. But I think the main question is, evacuate where? To the moon, perhaps? Yeah. So this is the situation in Gaza. It's a humanitarian catastrophe. The hospitals are being very systematically targeted. And this is very important to note, because the collapse of the healthcare system, coupled with the siege imposed on Gaza, would significantly increase infections. And with the collapse of the healthcare system, the fatalities will double and triple if Palestinians are unable to receive proper healthcare. Currently, there are 7 hospitals functioning in the north, 7 hospitals functioning in the south of Gaza. But all of them are partially functioning, and they are at continuous risk of shutdown because they're targeted by the Israeli military and because of shortages in fuel, which would compromise the lives of patients that are receiving kidney dialysis, of premature babies, of all of the most vulnerable cases in hospitals here. This is now the situation. Of course, it's important to note that you have over 500,000, almost 600,000 Palestinians. They were designated by the World Food Programme as living in crisis or higher levels in terms of food insecurity. All of the residents of the Gaza Strip of 2.3 million are at severe food insecurity, but these 500,000 or more are at severe food insecurity. The situation is very, very, very stark, to put it politely here. It's important to note that Israel has been exploiting its assault on Gaza to advance settler colonialism in a very silent way in the West Bank, including Jerusalem, because all of the spotlight is now on Gaza. In the West Bank, including Jerusalem, there's daily incursions into the vast majority of Palestinian cities. There is the crackdown on any form of activism and mobilization, particularly among Palestinians in Jerusalem and inside the Green Line, where you have a sizable indigenous Palestinian minority standing at 17% of the population. Any kind of mobilization, any kind of a pushback against Israel, the Israeli genocide being perpetrated in Gaza is being faced by a very significant crackdown in these areas. In terms of settler colonialism in the West Bank, demolitions by Israel have persisted and have continued at an unprecedented levels in the West Bank. Here, these demolitions, whether they come under the pretext of a lack of building permits, which are impossible to obtain from the Israeli civil administration, which is the military body that governs the West Bank, whether as part of incursions or as punitive measures in here. Demolitions and displacement have been witnessed at a very high rate. We've also seen significantly increasing settler violence in the West Bank, which has driven out herding communities that are already, before October 7th, have been very vulnerable and very marginalized and targeted by Israel's settler colonial policy. More than 1,200 Palestinians in herding communities have been displaced since October 7th. This is in a nutshell what has been going on since October 7th. What is devastating that we see this happening with continued impunity, with a lack of any form of accountability on these matters and these Israeli measures.
Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, and thank you for providing that update. I know in the previous podcast, you also provided a lot more context of what was happening before October 7th. So For anyone who's interested in learning more about that, they can go back and listen to your previous episode. But yes, the widespread and indiscriminate harm that you have just described that's been committed against Palestinians undoubtedly amounts to international crimes, whether that is war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide. So Palestine is a state party to the International Criminal Court, but we've seen very little action on the part of the court. Munir, could you please provide us with some understanding as to why you think this is the case?
Yes, indeed. It's very sad to observe the International Criminal Court being silent at a time when a genocide is ongoing. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court is aware of all of the ongoing conditions. Not only that, the prosecutor has also received reports prior to this genocide. He knows that there were many war crimes and crimes against humanity that had been ongoing before October 7th. He knew that an apartheid regime, which is a crime against humanity condemned by the Rome Statute, was also ongoing in Palestine. He received reports, whether from the civil society, from the United Nations Commission of Inquiry that was appointed back in 2021. He received information from international organizations, etc. So he has a lot of data that he should have used in his capacity and in his mandate to accuse specific individuals of war crimes or crimes against humanity, even before the genocide that started on 7th October. However, he was very silent during that period. Then, the genocide started. We started observing all of the crimes. The Israeli government very early in, on October, after October 7th, said that they were going to starve Gaza Strip and to cut water and electricity and fuel and food. They declared it, right? So it's very rare that a criminal would actually make such a statement. Usually people deny that they did something. With the Israeli case, in this specific case, they did not even deny it. They declared it proudly, and they continued using their genocidal language to say that they're going to destroy Gaza Strip, that there is no difference between civilians and combatants in the Gaza Strip. So they were very clear about what they were going to do, and still the International Criminal Court did not intervene. Then suddenly, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court appeared in Rafah crossing, which was a positive thing to do in general, and he said that he was investigating. Okay, and this was before any truck was allowed to enter the Gaza Strip carrying any food or any humanitarian aid or any medical equipment. After that, there was some leverage in the world for some, but not sufficient, food and other humanitarian needs to enter the Gaza Strip through Egypt. But it was still not enough. He appeared again in Cairo, and then suddenly he came to Israel, Palestine. Actually, at the first appearance, actually, at the beginning, he went with a visit that he had not declared, and he concealed actually visiting the Israel before visiting Palestine. He went to the surrounding areas of the Gaza Strip, and he toured the areas in which the October 7th attack was conducted. And he only listened to the Israeli narrative about that, the Israeli state narrative, and not any independent investigation. And then he declared that he was not there to investigate. And that's quite weird. Why would you go to a place without investigating? You're a prosecutor. You have a team of investigators. If you go somewhere, you go there to investigate. Then he visited Ramallah. After this visit was known to the world, he decided to go and visit Ramallah in Palestine, and he avoided meeting with the victims as he was requested by the Palestinian civil society organizations. So the Palestinian human rights organizations in Palestine decided to boycott his visit and not to meet him while he visited Ramallah in objection to his attitude towards the Palestinian victims. In that way, it was very clear that he did not look equally, or express at least that he looks equally at all peoples, regardless of what their nationality and background is. And then he wrote a statement later on that actually carried a lot of political messages as opposed to legal messages. And until today, we are already in February 2024. And until now, he has not accused one individual of a war crime, crime against humanity, or genocide, despite the fact that the International Court of Justice has seen that the case that South Africa filed in the International Court of Justice was acceptable, and that there is a plausible genocide ongoing in the Gaza Strip. So despite all of that, we still see that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court is not moving. Even if he has the argument that he is currently investigating what is ongoing today, despite the fact that I'm not sure how the investigation is going and whether he has done any attempt to, for example, take testimonies from those who are currently present in Cairo, in Egypt, in the hospitals or in other places to see what they have witnessed, whether he has sought to meet victims who have gone outside the Gaza Strip to anywhere else in the world. So we still don't know that for sure. It's not clear what he's doing. There are no indications that he is seeking that knowledge. I don't know if it exists. But at the same time, he also has a lot of files that he can start using from before October. They are ready, they are clear, they are well documented, and he can start using. We saw that he did issue an arrest warrant for Putin, for example. And I'm not sure whether he had an opportunity to investigate better in Ukraine than he had in Palestine. Or why was he so quick in that sense, as opposed to Palestine? Basically, Mr. Khan is accused of having double standards. There are calls for his resignation, or at least for him to do his job properly.
Thanks very much, Munir. And you mentioned the ICJ as well, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But yes, you've really explained that the lack of action on the part of the ICC has demonstrated that there are double standards in existence, that, you know, the Western world and its interpretation and enforcement of legal principles is demonstrating bias. And indeed, this isn't a new critique. I mean, since its inception, the ICC has been critiqued for having Eurocentric bias, you know, for focusing primarily on Africa. So particularly decolonial and postcolonial scholars have been saying this, you know, since the inception of the court. Tamara, this links well into your research that you're doing at the moment for your PhD. Can you explain how you see this relating to your research in settler colonialism?
Yes. Thank you, Amanda. It links very, very direct into the research I am doing. But before I get to that, I want to build on what you were just saying. There's a very clear double standard that demonstrates the hypocrisy of the Western world, whether in how international law is interpreted, basically, and leading Western countries that have significant power at the global stage. They invoke Israel's right to self-defense when it is well established that people under occupation are the ones who are entitled to self-defense and armed resistance, both, and that occupying powers are not entitled to the right to self-defense for any attacks that emanate from occupied territory. Gaza continues to remain occupied. Of course, the Israeli propaganda machine would say that Israel is not occupying Gaza, but a very simple task of effective control as captured in the Tzimel case and in the hostages case would prove that very clearly that Gaza remains under occupation. The most recent siege after October 7 is a clear-cut example of effective control over Gaza. I don't want to get too much into that, but yes, there's ample evidence of this. Of course, this is when we talk about the Israel's lack of right to self-defense. In this case, it is very well captured in the advisory opinion on the war issued by the International Court of Justice in 2004. Of course, funnily enough, it's yet to be implemented. I'll come back to that here. Almost 20 years on its issuance. It's yet to be implemented. And it was reiterated by states in the United Nations as part of the deliberations for resolutions around ceasefire. It was reiterated at least by Jordan and Pakistan here. So this relates to the point I was saying that the interpretation of international law by Western states, where they claim that Israel has a right to self-defense, and the criticism comes at the level whether the Israeli response is proportionate or not here. And then even in cases of non-proportionality, the problem with international law and these Western states, how they engage on this, is that they are not activating enforcement mechanisms, accountability mechanisms. Munir had just elaborated on that at the level of the International Criminal Court here. And it's important to see this as part of the support of the settler colony to the settler colony. They talk about a rules-based order. It is a key component of this rules-based order is democracy. This makes me think of the theory that democracies do not fight with one another, about the democratic peace theory. For me, to be honest, Amanda, it's absurd to put things in this matter. It's not that democracies do not fight with each other. It's that these democracies, who are historically settler colonies and continue to be today, they support one another and they shield one another. And of course, this hypocritical Western world is going to shield their last active or very active settler colony here is placed in a very strategic region in the world, and where they continue to have imperialistic interests and endeavors in the region, the Middle East. I am talking here. Imperialistic endeavors that relate to the trade route, that relate to the availability of oil reserves, the abundance of oil reserves, and of course, the gas reserves. So all of these countries would come rushing to the aid of their last beloved settler colony here in the region. Of course, when they were all talking about the rules-based order and the theories that they come up with for how peace should look like, whether it is the democratic peace theory or the liberal peace paradigm and theory, and all of these, they come up with these models. And of course, part of their settler colonial remnants is that they impose them from the outside on the so-called global south that has continued to be south and third world and underdeveloped. Another key part of their settler colonial narrative here, in order to perpetuate their domination and hegemony. So for me, I know that I branched out into many things here. I see Western states' support for Israel as part and parcel of a very sophisticated, quote-unquote, system of oppression and domination, whether through the imposition of solutions from the outside. They're not solutions when they do not respect Palestinian concessions in accepting a two-state solution. We made a very significant concession 30 years ago here. No one respected that concession. We made the concession to accept a racist, dominating model for peace that they imposed from the outside, excluding Palestinian voices, excluding Palestinian aspirations for a much more just solution, a one state with equal rights for all of its citizens, just like before the Palestinian Nakba in 1948. We were willing to forgive the atrocities, the historical atrocities that were committed. And Israeli greed never stopped from 1948 until now. We were willing to forgive. We were willing to open a new leaf and start over and proceed as if nothing has happened, if mineral justice was effectuated. This wasn't something that was enabled, although it is the solution that better serves justice. And my fieldwork in my PhD shows that Palestinians prefer a one-state model, partly because they feel that the concessions we made 30 years ago were not respected. But the sabotage of this approach, the imposition of a two-state solution from the outside, the creation of a Palestinian national elite that would impose it top-down on the Palestinians would have all worked if there was proper accountability and ending of Israeli impunity. If there was proper pressure by the so-called progressive and developed world, basically, if they had imposed and put the important pressure that they should have put on Israel to simply just roll back its occupation. It was very simple to do that, and they didn't. But now, while Israel continues committing international crimes with impunity, without accountability, they rush to defend Israel's right to self-defense, a right that is non-existent. Amanda, it doesn't exist. This right to self-defense when you colonize people, when you subject them to occupation, when you impose a suffocating siege that reaches a level where they calculate the amount of food and calories that need to enter Gaza to prevent starvation. Of course, all of this was before October 7th. Since October 7th, the situation, like we have said, it's unbelievable here. All of that. And Israel continues to commit all of these crimes. I reiterate what Munir said, that war crimes and crimes against humanity had existed before October 7th. They continue with impunity and without any accountability. And this can all be seen in the larger framework of the support of the settler colony to the settler colony and the domination, the continued domination of the global north over the global south.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. And let's pick up on one of the themes that you were just discussing about South-South solidarity. And Munir, maybe taking back to what you had mentioned previously about the ICJ, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the ICJ case and also the significance that the case was taken by South Africa.
Yes, the ICJ case was actually conceptualized as early as the first few weeks of October. Many scholars were thinking about it, calling for it, saying that even before Israel had gone that far in its destruction of the Gaza Strip and in its murder of dozens of thousands of Palestinians and the injury and all of that, it was clear from the way the offensive started in the Gaza Strip that this is where we were heading. And therefore, a number of scholars quite early on started saying we need to use the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention can protect Palestinians because you could use provisional measures that may be enforced on Israel and stop the genocide that was starting. Now, after that, of course, this wasn't picked up. Then Israel progressed a lot with the genocide. It actually managed to destroy a lot of the Gaza Strip and to murder dozens of thousands and injure and destroy the infrastructure. It went with its ground operations from one hospital to the other. It's actually quite weird. I haven't seen a war in the past in the world where the military objectives are the hospitals, where the army, the army is moving from one hospital, finishing something there, and then leaving the area and going to another hospital and so on. Basically, hospitals were the main place of refuge for Palestinians. That's where Palestinians, took refuge. They thought that hospitals were safer at least than the rest of the Gaza. Israel wanted to prove them wrong and to make sure that there is no place that was safe and to force them to move to the south. So that's how it started its military operation. And the man-made disaster became unbearable. We started witnessing hunger that is still growing until the current day. Pandemics started spreading among Palestinians, especially in camps and schools that were overcrowded with displaced persons, forcibly displaced from their homes as a result of the Israeli military operations. During that period, I think collectively as a civil society, Palestinian and international, we were asking in the media, any state should take this forward. Any state that ratified the Genocide Convention and that did not express any reservations on Article 9, which allows it to file a case against any state and vice versa, should go forward and do it. And then who picked it up? South Africa. And it's not surprising that South Africa is actually a role model for us. South Africa went through an apartheid regime. They went through racism and they struggled until they forced their freedom upon the whole world. Also, South Africa, during the apartheid regime was supported by the same forces that support Israel today. The same global north, if I take it as a general thing, with exceptions obviously, also supported the apartheid regime, and they only were forced to stop supporting it at the very late stages when it became clearly inconvenient to support a regime like that. Unfortunately, it hasn't become inconvenient enough for them to support the Israeli apartheid regime and the Israeli genocide. And that's why we still do not see any difference. But South Africa had managed to attract and call for solidarity from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, so from the global south actually, to impose sanctions on the apartheid regime. And this was only picked up at the very last stages by the West, and only when the West actually picked it up did the apartheid regime discover that it has to dismantle itself and go for equality and peace and human rights. And only then did the apartheid regime discover that white supremacy cannot exist forever. Now, in our part of the world, we still have this colonial supremacy, the Jewish supremacy in our case, over Palestinians. This is what Israel is calling for and actually not only implementing through its apartheid regime. And until now, we still don't have the attention of the global north for this issue. And I think I can totally link with what Tamara said earlier, with the way that colonies and colonial powers will continue to support their former colonies as long as it's still convenient for them. Now, the ICJ case is actually very important. Through this case, South Africa, for the first time, in my opinion, breached the wall of impunity that Israel and a number of countries in the world have built around Israel. Indeed, Israel as a state, but also the Israelis as individuals, have been immune from accountability. Impunity has been the rule since 1948 until today. And the more Israel went forward with violations of international law, the more it got rewarded. We could observe that in 2018, Donald Trump decided to help Israel to finish a number of issues. One of the things he did, breaching a Security Council resolution, was to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which is contrary not only to international law, but even to a Security Council resolution that the United States had allowed to pass in 1980. Despite that, this is what Donald Trump decided to do. And he also decided to encourage Israel to annex land in the West Bank. And they stopped his money to the UNRWA, the US money to UNRWA at the time, the Work and Relief Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UN Agency for the Palestinian Refugees, etc. So he did all of that. And then how did our region react? Unfortunately, he also managed at the same time to secure new normalization relationships between Israel and some of the states in our region. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan. So Israel was rewarded despite the fact that its crimes were still ongoing. Quite surprising. Now South Africa is changing this dynamic. It went to the International Court of Justice. It is addressing genocide. Obviously, genocide does not only invoke responsibilities for the state that commits genocide, but also for states that support genocide, that are complicit with genocide, that help genocide to be implemented. So after that, we started observing some differences, not enough. I mean, some people might say, so the ICJ decision and the provisional measures that were decided by the ICJ are useless. I would argue the opposite, actually. Yes, they haven't stopped the genocide. I agree. From that point of view, they are useless. But we've started seeing some new trends that haven't happened in the past few months. One of them, for example, a court in the Netherlands decided to stop exporting parts for Israeli fighter jets, right? This is an important court decision from a European country. The United States recently, I think today or yesterday, they are now starting to investigate the Israeli use of the white phosphorus, which happened back in October. It happened in October, and now they want to investigate. But the fact that already Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and other organizations already they issued reports back in October saying that Israel was using white phosphorus. The US ignored it. Now it's investigating. So you can start seeing that there are some changing trends. We can see that the Europeans are starting to speak different. To speak, not to act yet. So those who totally supported the Israeli military operations, despite the accusation of genocide, are now much more careful. Now they change their language. I hope that they will change their actions, but now they are starting to change their language. We could see that with the European Union, etc., and even Germany, which has supported the Israeli genocide unconditionally, now is starting to use a different language. I think they realize that they are complicit with the genocide, and there might be some consequences for that. It's very unfortunate, obviously, when I speak of Germany, I speak with pain, because Germany was the country that had committed a lot of genocides in the past. And following the Second World War, Germany said never again. And, you know, when I've visited Germany a number of times, and I have a lot of German friends, and I've witnessed how much in their education and upbringing, they actually are raised to hate genocide and to be aware of the mistakes of the past. But how did this not translate to hating genocide against everyone in the world, including the Palestinian people, who are not less human beings than anybody else? I don't know. There is something wrong with the way never again is interpreted in Germany and in other places around the world as well. So now it's clear that there are some things changing as a result of South Africa's action. And this case only started now. I mean, the first step was South Africa applied for provisional measures. The provisional measures were ordered by the court because it saw that there is merit in the case of South Africa. and it wasn't just an empty accusation of genocide as Israel claims. And on the 26th of February, Israel is expected to and announce that it will submit a report showing how or whether it actually abided by the provisional orders of the court. This will allow South Africa to respond. So basically, all of the documentation of the continuous crimes that are taking place in the Gaza Strip will be, and certainly are already being, presented to South Africa for its response. And then the court will have to revisit its decision and potentially also even provide new measures, new provisional measures. South Africa, even a couple of days ago, did a new intervention asking for a new provisional measure for not attacking Rafah. Tamara has eloquently spoken of the imminent risk at Rafah that, if it actually takes place, will certainly result in another undescribable crimes similar to, but maybe with a bigger gravity or numbers density compared to what has happened in the past. So South Africa is continuing its struggle. South Africa is committed to justice. It is committed to humanity, and it is leading in the world. I think that many countries will follow. At the end of the day, humanity supports humanity. Everybody in the world will value human life, and only those who see an interest in hegemony and imperialism and genocide will refrain from, stopping this genocide. But I think the world will act differently, and eventually the facts and reality that we are living on will change.
Yeah, I really hope so. And maybe on this theme of challenging impunity, particularly, the potential for bringing cases in the international arena within this framework of trying to internationalize the Palestinian cause. Do you think that this might have an impact, for example, on countries utilizing universal jurisdiction as a way of trying to challenge impunity?
Yeah, universal jurisdiction can play an important role in challenging impunity, certainly. And look, the Palestinians, especially after the peace process, they started the so-called peace process. I don't think of it as peace process, but that's what they call it. So let's use the name that it's known for. So since then, the Palestinians have really focused on international law and what's called international legitimacy, which is not really international law, but it's more or less like what the international community accepts as good and bad. So that's a different type of setting. But anyway, so Palestinians said, okay, we will use international law and international legitimacy, and this will not fail us. And indeed, the Palestinian diplomacy in, United Nations General Assembly and other places, Security Council, but also Human Rights Council, etc., has been growing. The Palestinian leadership has continuously asked for different measures of justice. However, we have been failed once and again by the international community. We haven't been failed, by the way, in recognizing Palestinian rights. This is important to know. The international community has historically recognized Palestinian rights very well. However, the problem comes with the enforcement or with even pressure. The resolutions haven't had teeth. And because of that, we have been failed. Palestine decided to join the ICC back in 2008, actually. And since 2008, and today we are in 2024, we have been seeking justice from the ICC, and we have been only delayed without any clear justification. Yes, we have progressed in the ICC, but we see how the ICC works in other situations, We saw, for example, how despite the fact that Sudan wasn't part of the ICC, how very quickly the Security Council referred Sudan to the ICC during the genocide in Darfur. And the prosecutor then very quickly, reacted, even without necessarily having the proper investigation. So we can see how the ICC works in other places and how it's working here. And we really feel failed until today by the international justice system. But also we have been failed by, in universal jurisdiction cases. And Palestinians have had a number of attempts in Belgium and in the UK to use universal jurisdiction to request some justice and to prosecute some more criminals. But all of them failed, and there were changes in the laws like that. These countries changed their laws in order to make sure that Israeli officials will not be, held without permission, without governmental and political permissions. So it's very unfortunate. Now, if the question is, do we give up universal jurisdiction? I would say no. We shouldn't give up universal jurisdiction. I think it will continue to be relevant. War crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression do not expire. There is no statute of limitations. So you can prosecute a person who committed these crimes even after 10, 20, 30, 50 years. I've read one case where during the Soviet Union in 1949, there were people who were displaced in the Soviet Union. Later on, 50 years later, they were prosecuted, 50 years after that. So this happens, and I believe that we shouldn't give up a number of things. First, we shouldn't give up universal jurisdiction. I think one day a country will make the right choice and use universal jurisdiction to prosecute criminals in order to bring about some justice to the victims. Two, the fact that even in the future, if a certain state, even if the state of Palestine, decides to adopt international humanitarian law and international criminal law with its own criminal jurisdiction and criminal codes, then it can also prosecute retroactively. This has been done in the past. The European Court of Human Rights decided that even if a domestic criminal code was introduced recently, you can still prosecute retroactively because international crimes were crimes since they were recognized as such after the Second World War and after a specific General Assembly resolution that recognized the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals' principles as universal, giving them, the customary international norms, recognition to become global. So international crimes are international crimes. We can prosecute them today, which is, of course, better because justice delayed is justice denied. And this is our experience so far. We have only been denied justice until today. But, every criminal should remember, maybe that's a good message to say that every person who's committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, etc., should remember that even if they are immune today, they might not be immune tomorrow, and that justice might come. It doesn't always come, but it might come if the right circumstances allow for it to happen. So they should remember that.
Yes, thank you. And picking up on, I suppose, solutions and maybe messages of hope, Tamara, in the most recent article that you published, which we'll link for the listeners in the show notes, you said, quote, "People must keep talking about Palestine and Palestinians even after the last bullet is shot and the last rocket is fired, because the ceasefire will not bring about an end to Israeli occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid." In your opinion, what other measures can and should be used to bring justice to Palestine and Palestinians, perhaps picking up on some of the themes that Munir was just mentioning?
Before I get to that, I would like to say that a very well documented strategy by Israel is that they impose new facts on the ground. And because of their continued impunity and lack of accountability, this becomes the new standard that we work from, essentially. So we must not fall into this trap again Because this time Israel has really went too far. Shouldn't be aiming just for a ceasefire. There are key issues that need to be addressed, and we need to continue to work on addressing them. Ending the occupation, halting settler colonialism, the issue of Palestinian prisoners or in Israeli jails. I always find it funny, Amanda, that we call Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, where military courts set up by Israel have a conviction rate that's higher than 99%. We question the legitimacy of this system and its bias and the lack of due process. We still call them prisoners, while Israeli captives in Gaza are called hostages. I think we need to be careful about how we address and engage with these terms. Either they're both hostages, or both prisoners, or both captives. People can choose whichever one they want. But this is another clear example of the double standard we see. 99% of Palestinians are convicted. They're called prisoners. Israelis are given the term hostage. Yes, something to think about. Having said this, we need to work on addressing all of these things. We need to re-put the important, vital issues on the table. No one talks about Jerusalem anymore. Jerusalem is central to Palestinian perceptions of justice. There's so much to deal with that now when you talk about Palestinian refugees whose right of return is guaranteed under international law, and the so-called international legitimacy that Munir was referring to earlier, they tell you it's not applicable. Let's deal with everything else first. What I'm saying, we shouldn't fall into the trap of just because of the carnage that we are witnessing that we only call for a ceasefire, that we accept here, because it's new facts on the ground that Israel will capitalize on and build on in order to advance its settler colonialism, which has morphed from taking over land and displacing Palestinians and became entrenched into apartheid regime, into an outright, very clear system and mission of genocide of Palestinians, as coined by Patrick Wood. Having said this, Amanda, and I reiterate what Munir has said, the Palestinian polity has adopted the strategy of internationalizing the Palestinian cause, quote unquote, here. Since 1974, it became more pronounced in 1994, basically with the so-called peace process, or 1993, whenever we want to consider it to have started the so-called peace process. Here. Since 2014, when the last round of negotiations have collapsed, it was the only strategy adopted. And as Munir demonstrated, has miserably failed as a strategy in bringing about accountability for crimes perpetrated by Israel and bringing about justice to Palestinians. I think we need to continue to use the strategy nonetheless. Why? Because of another theme that we discussed, Amanda, South-South solidarity. From the 7th of October, 7 Global South countries referred the situation of Palestine to the International Criminal Court. True, there hasn't been action, but it's important to continue to do that, to apply more pressure, to expose the hypocrisy and the double standard. There is new avenues that we need to consider other than just the International Criminal Court, which is obviously very biased and for a good reason has been called the African Court here. Obviously, it hasn't went in after any of the global north perpetrators of international crime and has focused more on the weaker actors. Again, it ties back to settler colonialism and the maintenance of global hegemony by the global north. But it's important to go after Israel in the International Criminal Court to keep building the pressure. It's important to continue to pursue accountability through and reparations through the International Court of Justice, because even if the enforcement does not happen because of the US veto in the Security Council, it is a cumulation of decisions for the benefit of Palestine. It's important to consider how is it that we can work on getting Israel expelled from international organizations and bodies to add to the pressure. It's important to see how we can capitalize on all of these decisions in order for countries to restrict or cede relations with Israel. One example that builds on the International Court of Justice, a very important example. Munir talked about the court in the Netherlands, but I want to even talk about a harder example whereby a Japanese company severed all ties with Al-Quds systems, security systems, the Israeli security systems that are complicit in war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. And this is coming at the level of the private sector here. And they clearly cited the International Court of Justice provisional measures as the main reason for that here. It's important to continue to do all of that, especially because it keeps the Palestinian cause on the table of the so-called international community. We saw this, how much the Palestinian cause has suffered during the active years of the Arab Spring, where other regional issues came to dominate and come to the foreground more than the Palestinian cause. So all of these mechanisms, it's very important to keep using them to keep Palestine on the table here. I would also say that public mobilization has proved its efficacy. More than 4 months into the assault on Gaza, demonstrations are still going strong. The demonstration in London last week and also reached another time, almost 1 million here. This is 4 months into an assault. Yes, the International Court of Justice and the pressure at the international level by Global South state has been important. But these demonstrations have also impacted the media discourse and the position of states in here. That's very, very, very important here. We need for this demonstration for Palestine not to be a trend when there is a devastating assault on Palestinians, but something that is sustained, demanding the rights and justice for Palestine. I would also add that a very effective tool in generating material harm and reputational harm is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Despite the devastating losses in Gaza, when I read news pieces about the losses that Burger King and McDonald's and Starbucks sustained, when I hear that Zara took off the collection that reflected or was inspired by the devastation in Gaza, the insolence of such a collection being put forward, that it was removed because of the backlash. When we see the material harm and reputational harm being generated because of complicity in war crimes and genocide by these companies, it gives me hope. When we see Puma saying that they're not going to renew their contract with the Israeli football so-called national team to avoid the reputational harm in the first place, shows how effective the strategy is. And for on this occasion, it's not easy sometimes to find out what is on the boycott list and what is not. So I want to take this platform and this opportunity to recommend an application, very simple application that is available on iOS, on Huawei, and on Android. It's called No Thanks. You download this application on your smartphone. Virtually most people in the world now have smartphones. You just put the name of the brand or you scan the barcode and it tells you whether it's on the boycott list or not. It uses a very sophisticated algorithm that brings in all of the sources that have been and investigations done by the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, but also the Palestine solidarity movement. It's an excellent application so that if you are in the store, in the pharmacy, wherever you are, at the moment, you check if it is on the boycott list so that you can make an informed decision about the products that you buy. Because this has proven to be a very effective strategy. So what I'm saying, Amanda, is that we need to continue to use current strategies even if they have failed, because they have positive aspects that we are not recognizing at the moment. But we need to diversify resistance strategies, and we need to go back to our natural allies. After the so-called peace process, Palestine has went into alliances or tried to forge alliances and rely on Western countries and the USA. They have failed us time and again, Amanda. Our natural allies are the people who have been colonized, that continue to be colonized, that continue to be subjected to global North domination. Our natural allies are Africa and Asia and Latin America. This is where we need to go to. This is where we need to create a critical mass to make the global North think again. The global North relies on our fragmentation. It relies on partitioning us and creating different circumstances for us that prevent our solidarity. It's very important to overcome this fragmentation so that we can put a united front to challenge global North hegemony.
Thanks very much, Tamara. Yeah, I think, it's really easy to feel hopeless in this type of situation where, we're constantly seeing footage of the atrocities. But I think you've both done such a good job of explaining, that people need to take those feelings and put them into action and continue to put pressure on their governments to take action and use things like BDS, to try to make any small changes that we have the power to make in our lives. So, yes, thank you so much for both of you joining us. This has been a really important and informative podcast. I really hope that the next time we come together, we are talking about the new peace agreements and moving forward, hopefully in line with Tamara's research in relation to a one-state solution. So thank you both so much, and it was lovely to meet you, Munir.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It was great to meet you. Great pleasure to be same podcast with you tomorrow.